Michael, you're the eighth generation of the Mack family in the business of attractions. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The eighth generation.
The eighth generation, yes. We did start 1718, our company back in Waldkirch in the Black Forest. And so I'm the eighth generation of heading up the family.
What kind of rides did you produce in 1780?
Well, our mother company, Mack Rides, nowadays how it is called, is based in the Black Forest. So obviously you got a lot of wood there. Mm-hmm. So we started being wood producers. We did carriages, wagons, all kind of transportation for the organs which been in Waldkirch. So we were a manufacturer of like moving things. And the fun part was that in 1921, we did the first wooden roller coaster. So movement was always something of the history of Mack Rides.
1921, you did the first wooden roller coaster in the world or in Germany?
We did it in Denmark, actually. So let's say Europe. But at that time, I think the world was conceived when it comes to roller coasters to Europe. I mean, there have been a couple in America, but we didn't deliver to America at that time, just to Europe.
And you're now the eighth generation. So you had 7 generations of Macks pursuing the transportation business with no interruption.
That's correct.
How do you make sure that within 8 generations you don't have one generation that says like, I don't want to do this anymore, you know? And then it happens all the time in family businesses.
Well, I think it's the area where we're based. We're based in the Black Forest, where you kind of step with both feet on the ground. You don't have a big city around, which really could not drive your attendance to the brand or your like attention to the brand. So you don't have to be a status symbol. You don't need the fast car or being in the posh clubs. So we're very down to earth in the area we live in, living close to France, still have the savoir vivre, the beautiness of life. We have good food. And you have a burden, I mean, to carry on from the family history. And that's what I was always taught by my predecessors, like my dad and my grandfather, you know, say like, we're handing the torch over. And so you don't want to be the one who screws up the family history because you wake up in every morning and say, oh, it could be me doing something stupid or silly. So to make a decision, whether it be a new roller coaster, whether it be a new attraction, you always have to be 120% sure that what you do fits the market and fits the needs. And you have to convince the rest of the family that your ideas are as brilliant as you think they are.
So it all started with Mack Rides?
It all started with Mack Rides.
Mack, the owner and operator of Europa Park, that was much later.
It was much later. It was in 1973 when my father was the first one in the family history who studied mechanical engineer in Karlsruhe. Mm-hmm. And there's a funny story because my grandfather was a craftsman and he never understood what he was doing on the computer because he always were like working with his hands. So he was asking him after 6 months of studying, when are you finished? And my daddy said like, well, it takes much longer. It takes like 2.5 years or 3 years back in the days. Mm-hmm. But he was like, my grandfather never wanted him to be a study professor or like an advocate or anything which doesn't have anything to do with our company. So he asked him right after his studies to come back to the company. And even during studies, my dad had to build up rides for the factory. So he always wanted to make sure that my father is always very connected to the Mack Rides company. And when he finished his studies, he said like, okay, now show me what you can, show me what you have learned in mechanical engineering years. And he said like, you're gonna go to Montreal and do a wild mouse back in the days and build the wild mouse. And he sent him on his own over, just the one mechanic with him. Mm-hmm. And my father had to prove that he was able to build up and set up a wild mouse. So that was kind of the proof of evidence of my grandfather that the studied son could be worth of running the company.
That is very interesting. That's the opposite of what you hear now, right? Mm-hmm. So your grandfather wanted your father not to be so academic, but to prove that he is hands-on.
That's right, yeah.
And he did.
And he did.
But how did he get to operations then?
Well, it was the dream when they put up the ride in the U.S. or in Canada. They were traveling around because they want to see what at that time Chance Morgan was doing, particularly for Disney, and they want to see around, look around what the Americans' competitor at that time. Mm-hmm. There were a couple. Now there are fewer ones, but at that time there were like a couple of manufacturers over there. And then they visited several parks, and on a beer napkin, so to say, they did the first drawings how a theme park could look like, because they said like, let's do a showcase for our roller coasters so the people can come and ride our coasters.
So that was the original idea, to
That
have a
was the original,
showcase.
to have a showroom, and we realized in the first year when 250,000 people come that not every single one would have a roller coaster in the backyard. So we said like, okay, this is not only customers who do come to Europa Park, it's really an own business.
So that's how it started.
That's how it
70s,
started in
Europa Park.
1973, and in 1975 we opened the park.
And the idea to create different sections for different countries with European history, that was born at the same time, or was it first just a castle and a few rides?
I mean, if you look at the history, and that's one of what I think the DNA of the Mack family and the Mack brand, if you want to call it so, is always to have like the generation conflict in a positive way, to evolve your own product. So if you see that my grandfather actually was against having the showroom close to the factory, and he was convinced actually by a showman, because he said like, we are the producers and we need somebody operating the park. So it was the Thiemann family actually who joined in as a joint venture, but he died like a half a year before we opened Europa Park. So we stepped in as an operator. Originally it wasn't planned because my grandfather didn't want being an operator. He just like, we are manufacturing but not an operator. So that's how we became an operator. So my father, being 24, mechanical engineering, coming from university, said like, we have to evolve the brand. It can't be just a roller coaster. So he was lucky to find Ulrich Damrau, who was a scenic builder from Märklin, the train manufacturer, and he was in Munich, but he was 64 years old, and he loved the idea of having a playground for children. So he said like, I earned that much money with Märklin and my pre-life that I want to go on this adventure. So he actually opened up a completely new era of theme park development, which was not really there in Germany. So my daddy brought it to a new level. My grandfather didn't like the European idea because he said like, that's kind of doesn't work, because in those days Europe was not the Europe we have today. So it was a visionary idea at that time for my father.
Exactly, because Europa Park basically preceded the European Union. You could travel between European countries without visas at the time, without borders.
Exactly. Which was like it was coincidence, because the first land we were looking at was at a little lake called Europa Lake. It was in Breisach, a little village south of Freiburg, and we didn't have enough money to actually build a bridge, which was asked by local authorities to go to that area, and then it was a swampland. So, but we loved the idea of a Europa Lake, so we took the name from there and said like a Europa Lake, so let's call it a Europa Park. The lake is not there anymore, but the park still exists, and it was visionary. But the thing I wanted to say is like, really in the generation conflict, and the positive conflict, to convince that my dad convinced my grandfather or his dad that it is the right idea. I think you have to be 120% to get the permission to do so, and I think that's one of the DNA and the secrets of our family history.
But then for a period of time, it was more about Europa Park than about Mack rides, right?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, if you look at the balance sheet, you could say so. If you're a purely business man who just sees the number, but I think it's about heart. And I think that what makes Europa Park and the Mack brand so strong. It's about, do you have the heart of loving what you're doing? And I think a lot of parks do seek that operational perfection. And it's not a size, it's not a question of size which really matters. It's like about the quality, the passion you give into your products. And so Mack Rides was always perceived as a mother. And my grandfather always said to me when I was a young kid, he always said like, it's not size what matters, but it's quality what matters. And so it was always, I mean, it hurt at our hearts, you know, when Mack Rides didn't have a great time, you know. I mean, like in a roller coaster, you have ups and downs, but so it was very crucial for me to entering 2005 the Mack Rides company. And I'm still saying that I'm a ride manufacturer at heart, even though I'm not a studied mechanical engineer. But it was kind of an honor to be 2005 responsible for the company and really bringing it to a new life. So I would never say it's the back side or the front side. We just belong together, and that's the most beautiful thing in life.
Europa Park gets amazing reviews around the world, and my question is, why do you never actually expand into other countries and create a Asia Park or Africa Park, bring this concept to a different part of the world?
Well, we do believe in quality, and my father always said to me, if you don't live at the area you're building the park, you can't achieve the quality. I know it sounds a bit weird in nowadays startup times where you really grow fast or have to grow fast in the digital world, but we do believe that quality needs time. And it might be old-fashioned, it might be right. We never know what the future brings, but for the time being, we're looking into a vast investment and a big expansion of Europa Park with a new water park coming in 2019. So we need to be focused on Roost because we want to have the best quality available of a water park. So we can't have too many irons in the fire.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather was very special for the region. So like you can't eat more than a schnitzel a day. So he always said like, in English it would be a steak a day, but schnitzel is very traditional food in Baden. But he says like, literally don't eat too much, but he said like you'd be happy with if you just have like a good meal a day, so you can't have more because then you get fat and lazy. So that was like the thinking of the family dynasty to say like better do great quality, watch yourself and don't go too fast.
But there's a chance that one day there will be several schnitzels.
Well, the family gets bigger. So,
Okay.
So you have to feed maybe in the future times like 18 or 20 max. So there might be the need of having more schnitzels. But let's see what the future brings. I mean, for my decade and generation, I think we have enough of work, and we're successful enough to feed our own families.
And there's another company, Macmedia, right, which you just founded a couple of years ago.
Yes, right. I mean, if you look now, what is the next phase for Europa Park? And we've been talking early in the interview that my father was the mechanical engineer who actually brought the European theming to Europa Park and made it to that fabulous brand, which my grandfather never really wanted, but he convinced him, and it was very hard playing to convince my grandfather with facts to be a European theme park. And I think that's the decade and the generation conflict in a positive way, which brings on the brand and makes the brand, luckily, better, bigger. And so it's the same generation conflict I'm having with my dad. Mm-hmm. And it takes a lot to convince him that the new ways are the right ways to develop the company. Because if we wouldn't have been the first in Germany doing hotels, we wouldn't be there where we are nowadays. I mean, we host over 5,500 people a day on site with our hotels. So we always have like a 5,500 attendance in the park through the hotels. Right. And the biggest hotel operator in Germany. So if we wouldn't have done that, we wouldn't be as strong as a brand as we nowadays.
You are the biggest hotel operator in Germany.
Yes.
The biggest single hotel operator in Germany on German soil.
Yes, not talking about the chains.
Right.
Yes.
But that's how many hotels you have right now?
We have in total 5 hotels,
yeah,
with approximately 5,000 beds.
Yeah, that's amazing. So Macmedia is doing VR, right?
Well, I conceived my dad to really changing a little bit of brand without losing the soil of Europa Park,
okay,
keeping the European theme. So we said, like, how can we integrate IP in a very decent way of not changing the brand face?
Right.
So what we did was like the first step with Macmedia really was like just a company who perceives the history of the past. So we did a lot of documentaries about who's been important for the company and moved on, signing the first deal with Luc Besson on our Arthur ride, and did a nice combination of movie, attraction ride, and park themings. And we moved on being the first one doing a VR coaster. Mm-hmm. So our old Alpen Express you can ride now with VR goggles. We've been the first out there on the market where you can ride with VR classes. So I think the future mix of the park is about storytelling, which is incorporated in Macmedia, VR technologies, building up brands, whether it be in the cinema, whether it be in TV, to go to next phase of Europa Park and bring out our first cinema movie with Warner this summer, Happy Family from David Sophia.
That's going to be your IP.
That's going to be our IP, yes.
So because people always refer to Europa Park, mm-hmm, as an example, mm-hmm, that you can get a great theme park done without an IP.
That's totally right. And we do still believe we don't want to change the face of Europa Park. We want to keep our European style of the park. But with media being involved on a coaster, we're much more free to show whatever we want to show and change it more faster and quicker without changing the face of the park.
Michael, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good day. Thank you.